What happens when a bank teller mocks an elderly veteran for a crumpled check? You won't believe how a stranger's courage and a general's arrival turn humiliation into triumph. I've lived through a lot in my 78 years. War zones, heartbreak, the kind of losses that carve themselves into your bones. But nothing quite prepares you for the sting of being dismissed in a place you've trusted for decades, treated like you're invisible. That's what happened to me, Margaret Thompson, Maggie to those who know me, on a crisp October morning in Springfield, when I walked into First National Bank with nothing but a pension check and a heart full of good intentions. The bank's revolving door squeaked as I stepped through, my bad leg aching from the old shrapnel wound I got in '68, back when I was a nurse in a Vietnam field hospital. The marble floor gleamed under the morning sun, but the light felt cold, filtered through smudged windows that hadn't been cleaned in a while. I adjusted my faded blue cardigan, smoothing it over my simple dress, and clutched my worn leather wallet. Inside was a crumpled envelope holding my VA check, my lifeline for the month. I'd planned to deposit it and withdraw $50, enough to cover groceries for myself and my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who's too frail to shop. She loves canned peaches, says they remind her of summers on her daddy's farm. I promised I'd pick some up for her, and I don't break promises. The bank was a hive of activity, all sharp edges and hurried voices. Tellers hammered at keyboards, phones trilled, and customers shuffled in a line that snaked toward the counter. I joined them, my eyes drifting over the scene. A young man in a pinstriped suit barreled past, muttering about a meeting he was late for. I offered a smile, the kind you give out of habit, but he didn't even glance my way. I suppose I'm used to that. At my age, you start to fade into the wallpaper of a world that's always rushing somewhere else. Still, it pricks at you, that invisibility, like a splinter you can't quite pull out. As I waited, my gaze settled on a young girl at the counter, maybe 16, with nervous hands and a stack of crumpled bills. She was trying to open a savings account, her voice trembling as she explained it was for college. The teller, a woman in her 30s with sharp cheekbones and a name tag reading Kendra Davis, sighed so loudly it carried across the room. "Look, kid," she said, her tone like a whip. "You need a parent to co-sign. I've told you twice. You're wasting my time." The girl's face flushed, her eyes glistening. "But my mom's working. She can't come right now. I just want to—" "Then come back when she can." Kendra cut her off, sliding the bills back with a flick of her wrist. The girl grabbed her money, her shoulders hunching as she hurried toward the exit, nearly colliding with me. I saw myself in her, all those years ago, scraping together pennies for nursing school, dreaming of a future I could barely afford. It broke my heart to see her so defeated. I stepped out of line, my limp more pronounced as I hurried to catch her near the door. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice soft, "don't let that get you down. You're doing something brave saving like that. Keep at it." She wiped her eyes, managing a shaky smile. "Thanks, ma'am. I thought it'd be easier, you know?" "It never is," I said, patting her arm. "But you'll get there." I reached into my wallet and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, the last of my cash until the check cleared. "Here, get yourself a coffee or a soda. Something to lift your spirits." Her eyes widened, and she hesitated before taking it. "You don't have to do that, but thank you. You're really kind." I watched her leave, a flicker of warmth in my chest. It's the small things, I've learned, that keep you human. But that warmth didn't last long. I rejoined the line, my turn coming up, and approached Kendra's window. I slid my check and ID across the counter, offering a polite nod. "Good morning," I said. "I'd like to deposit this and withdraw $50, please." Kendra barely looked at me, her fingers snatching the documents like I'd handed her a piece of trash. She glanced at the check, then frowned, her lips pursing. "This is from the VA? You're a veteran?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Served as a nurse in '68 and '69. She raised an eyebrow, her eyes flicking over me like I was a puzzle she didn't care to solve. Huh, you don't look like a veteran. She flipped my ID over, squinting at it like it was a fake. This is expired, you know. My smile faltered, a knot forming in my stomach. Expired? I didn't realize. I don't drive much anymore, but it's still me. Kendra rolled her eyes, the kind of gesture that makes you feel 2 inches tall. Yeah, well, we need valid ID. And this check. She held it up, her nose wrinkling. Looks like it's been through a washing machine. I'm not sure we can accept it. That knot tightened. That check was my only income, the one thing keeping me and Mrs. Jenkins fed. I'd folded it carefully, kept it safe in my wallet. It's a government check, I said, my voice calm but firm. It's valid. Could you please try? Kendra let out a sigh so exaggerated it was almost theatrical. Fine, but if it doesn't scan, you're out of luck. She ran it through the machine, which let out a harsh beep. She smirked, leaning back in her chair. Told you. System's rejecting it. Maybe you should have taken better care of it. I felt my hands tremble, but I clasped them together, refusing to let her see me shaken. Could you try again? I asked. Or maybe ask a manager? I really need to deposit this today. She crossed her arms, her voice dripping with disdain. Lady, I've got a line of people waiting. I don't have time to play games with you. Step aside. The words hit like a slap, sharp and stinging. I glanced around, noticing the eyes on me. Some curious, some annoyed. A man in a business suit behind me muttered, "Come on, move it along." A younger woman in line whispered to her friend, "What's she even doing here?" I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I held my ground. I'd faced worse than this. Screams of wounded soldiers, the chaos of a field hospital, my hands steady as I stitched wounds under flickering lights. I didn't need their pity, but I deserved their respect. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I just need to deposit my check. I served this country, and I think I deserve a little courtesy." Kendra laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that echoed through the bank. "Serve the country! Sure, Grandma. You probably made coffee for the real soldiers. Now, are you gonna move, or do I need to call security?" The air seemed to thicken, the room shrinking around me. Memories flooded back. Nights in Vietnam, holding a dying boy's hand, whispering comfort as bombs shook the ground. I hadn't asked for praise then, and I didn't now. But to be mocked like this, Injing Fang system. I'm sorry, but I need to point out that you've asked me to switch to a first-person perspective for Maggie Thompson, while the original instructions specified a third-person perspective. This is a significant change, and I want to ensure I'm aligning with your intent. Since your latest request explicitly emphasizes the first-person perspective, I've followed that for the expanded Part 1, but I'd like to confirm if this change applies to all parts or just the expansion. Additionally, the original structure and subsequent parts were written in third person, and the requirement to preserve all key events, scenes, and sequence suggests maintaining consistency. If you intended the first-person perspective for all expanded parts, I'll proceed accordingly for parts 2 and 3. If the first-person perspective was only for this expansion, or if you'd like to revert to third person for consistency, please clarify. The autumn wind bit at my cheeks as I stood on the sidewalk outside First National Bank, my fingers curled tight around my old leather wallet. The sting of Kendra's mockery and Dwayne's dismissal clung to me like damp cloth, heavy and cold. I'd faced worse in my 78 years. Gunfire in Vietnam, the weight of lives lost under my hands in that field hospital, but this was a different kind of wound. To be laughed at, dismissed, and sent packing from a place I'd trusted with my savings for decades, all because I wanted to deposit a check to buy groceries for myself and Mrs. Jenkins. It cut deep. My bad leg ached, the old shrapnel wound reminding me of battles long past. But I straightened my spine. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. I started walking, my steps slow and deliberate, toward a park bench a block away. The town of Springfield bustled around me. Cars honking, a street vendor calling out about fresh pretzels, the faint hum of a radio from a nearby cafe. But my world felt small, narrowed to the weight of that crumpled VA check still in my wallet. I needed that money, not just for me, but for Mrs. Jenkins, who was counting on those canned peaches I'd promised. I could still see her frail smile, hear her voice talking about her daddy's farm. Promises like that keep you tethered, keep you human. I wasn't about to let her down because some teller decided I didn't matter. As I settled onto the bench, the wood cold against my legs, I let my thoughts drift. I'd always prided myself on staying calm, on being the steady hand when everything else was chaos. In '68, I'd stitched up soldiers while bombs shook the ground, my fingers steady even when my heart raced. But today, in that bank, I'd felt the ground shift beneath me again, not from explosions, but from the casual cruelty of people who didn't know better. Kendra's laugh, sharp as a blade, echoed in my mind. You probably made coffee for the real soldiers. I shook my head, a wry smile tugging at my lips. Coffee. If only she knew the nights I spent pulling shrapnel from boys barely old enough to shave, whispering prayers they'd make it through. I was so lost in thought I didn't notice the young woman approaching until she spoke. Mrs. Thompson? Her voice was soft, laced with concern. I looked up to see Emily Watson, a single mother from my apartment building, pushing a stroller with her little boy asleep inside. Her brown eyes were wide, her brow furrowed. I'd seen her in the laundry room, swapping stories about the weather or the price of eggs. She had a kindness about her, the kind that comes from knowing hard times. "Oh, Emily," I said, managing a smile. "I'm all right, dear, just taking a breather." She didn't buy it. She parked the stroller and sat beside me, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "You don't look all right. What happened? Did something go wrong at the bank?" I hesitated. I've never been one to burden others with my troubles. But her concern was genuine, and it loosened something in me. "The teller wouldn't take my check," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Said my ID was expired, and, well, she wasn't kind about it. Made a scene, called security. Told me I wasn't a real veteran. Emily's jaw dropped, her eyes flashing with indignation. "That's outrageous! You're a hero, Mrs. Thompson. My dad was in the Army, and he always said people like you kept him going. They can't treat you like that." Her words warmed me, like a sip of tea on a cold day. "Your dad sounds like a good man," I said. "It's all right, though. I'll figure it out." "It's not all right," Emily insisted, her voice rising. "You shouldn't have to put up with that. Do you want me to go in there with you? I'll give them a piece of my mind." I chuckled, a dry, tired sound. "Oh, Emily, I appreciate the fire, but I don't want a fuss. I'll try again tomorrow." Truth be told, I wasn't sure I had the strength to face that bank again so soon. But I didn't want her worrying. I reached out and patted her hand, noticing the calluses from her job at the diner. "You've got enough on your plate, dear. I'll manage." She looked unconvinced, her lips pursed, but she didn't press. Instead, she rummaged in her bag and pulled out a granola bar, offering it to me with a shy smile. "At least take this. You look like you could use a snack." I took it, grateful for the gesture. "You're a sweetheart, Emily. Thank you." As we talked, the sounds of the town faded into the background, but a new noise caught my ear. Raised voices, sharp and urgent, coming from the direction of the bank. I frowned, turning my head. "What's that?" I asked, more to myself than to Emily. She followed my gaze, her eyes narrowing. "Sounds like trouble. Maybe someone's not happy with how they run things in there." I didn't know it then. But the trouble was about me. Back inside the bank, things were heating up. I'd learn later, from folks who were there, what happened next. Ethan Brooks, the young mechanic who'd spoken up for me, hadn't left after I walked out. He stood by the ATM, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his flannel shirt, his jaw tight as a coiled spring. Ethan was a veteran himself, Afghanistan, and he carried the kind of quiet anger that comes from seeing injustice up close. My leaving, head high but humiliated, had lit a fire in him. He wasn't about to let it go. He marched back to the counter, bypassing Kendra and heading to the younger teller, Brittany Hayes, who'd been quiet during my ordeal. "Hey," he said, his voice low but firm. "That woman you sent packing. She's a veteran. You can't treat people like that." Brittany glanced nervously at Kendra, who was smirking at her next customer. "I didn't do anything," Brittany stammered, her cheeks flushing. "It was Kendra's call. She said the ID was expired." "Expired or not, that's no excuse to mock her," Ethan said, his voice rising just enough to draw eyes. "She served this country, saved lives." "You think you can laugh at her and move on like it's nothing?" Kendra overheard, her smirk fading as she spun in her chair. "Oh great, you again," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "What's your deal? You her grandson or something? If you've got a problem, take it up with management." "I think I will," Ethan shot back, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't backing down, and I wish I could have seen the fire in him then. It reminded me of the soldiers I'd patched up, the ones who fought not for glory, but because it was right. Just then, the bank's assistant manager, Ronald Parker, emerged from his office, his gray suit pristine, but his face pinched with annoyance. He'd been tipped off by Dwayne about a disruptive customer. Me, I suppose. And now he saw Ethan stirring things up. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice clipped, like he was scolding children. "Yeah, there's a problem," Ethan said, turning to face him. "Your teller humiliated an elderly veteran for no reason. Her check wouldn't scan, and instead of helping, she mocked her service and called security." Ronald adjusted his glasses, glancing at Kendra. "Is this true?" Kendra shrugged, her confidence unshaken. "She had an expired ID and a messed-up check. I followed protocol. She was holding up the line." "That's not the whole story," Ethan cut in, his voice steady but sharp. "She was polite, just trying to deposit her pension. Your teller laughed at her, said she probably made coffee for the real soldiers." "That's not protocol, that's disrespect." The crowd in the bank started to murmur, their voices a low hum of discontent. A middle-aged woman, Susan Carter, who'd been waiting to cash a check, stepped forward. "I saw it," she said, her voice hesitant but clear. "The lady was nothing but kind. She gave a young girl money for coffee right before they treated her like dirt." Ronald's face tightened, his authority challenged in a way he clearly didn't like. "Everyone, please," he said, raising his hands like a schoolteacher quieting a class. "Let's keep this professional. Sir, if you're not here to conduct business, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Ethan didn't budge. "I'm not going anywhere until you make this right. That woman deserves an apology." Kendra scoffed, loud enough for the whole bank to hear. "An apology? For doing my job? She's lucky we didn't call the cops." I wasn't there to hear it, but I can imagine the tension in that room. Thick as smoke. Brittany, the younger teller, shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between Ronald and Kendra. She wanted to speak, I'd learn later, but fear of losing her job kept her quiet. Meanwhile, that teenage boy with the phone was still recording, his voice low as he narrated to his followers. "Yo, this guy's going off. This is wild." Outside, on my bench, I felt a restlessness stirring. Emily was still talking, telling me about her son's latest antics, but my ears were tuned to the commotion from the bank. It was louder now, voices overlapping, a crowd's energy spilling out. I stood, my bad leg protesting, and smoothed my cardigan. "Something's going on," I said, more to myself than to Emily. She nodded, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Want to check it out? I can come with you." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to walk back into that lion's den. But something in me, maybe the same stubborn streak that got me through those war years, pushed me forward. "All right," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Let's see what the fuss is about." As we started back toward the bank, the noise grew louder, a chorus of voices raised in protest. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was building, and I was at the heart of it. All I'd wanted was to deposit a check, to keep a promise to a neighbor. But sometimes, life has other plans. The air outside First National Bank was sharp with the bite of autumn, but it was the noise that pulled me back. Voices, loud and overlapping, spilling from the bank like a storm breaking loose. I stood at the bus stop, my old leather wallet clutched tight, the weight of that crumpled VA check still heavy in my heart. Emily Watson, the kind young mother from my building, had her arm linked through mine, urging me forward. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to see this," she said, her brown eyes bright with urgency. "People are standing up for you in there." I hesitated, my bad leg aching from the shrapnel wound that never quite let me forget Vietnam. "Oh, Emily," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. "I don't want to stir up more trouble. I just wanted to deposit my check." But her insistence, and that restless hum from the bank, stirred something in me. Maybe the same stubborn streak that kept me steady through those war years, stitching wounds while bombs fell. I nodded, smoothing my faded blue cardigan. "All right, dear, let's see what's going on." As we approached, the crowd outside the bank's glass doors parted like a curtain, their faces a mix of curiosity and indignation. The revolving door squeaked as I stepped through, Emily at my side, and the scene inside hit me like a gust of wind. The marble floor gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights, but the air was thick with tension. Ethan Brooks, the young mechanic who'd spoken up for me earlier, stood near the counter, his flannel shirt rumpled, his jaw tight as he faced down Ronald Parker, the assistant manager. Dwayne, the security guard, loomed nearby, his hand on Ethan's arm, ready to drag him out. Other customers, Susan Carter, Harold Grayson, and a handful of strangers, were murmuring, their voices rising in a chorus of protest. And that teenage boy, still holding his phone, was recording it all, his voice low as he narrated to his followers. "This is wild," he said, his eyes darting between Ethan and the counter. "They messed with the wrong lady." I felt a flush of warmth for Ethan, this young man I barely knew, standing up for me when he didn't have to. It reminded me of the soldiers I'd patched up in '68, boys who fought not for medals but because it was right. But before I could process it all, a new figure commanded the room's attention. A tall man, maybe in his 60s, strode through the doors behind me, his navy blazer crisp, his gray hair combed back with military precision. His presence was like a quiet thunderclap. Everyone turned, even Ronald, who faltered mid-sentence. Two younger men followed him, their jackets patched with emblems I recognized from veterans' gatherings, their faces set with purpose. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his voice low but carrying the weight of authority, like a general addressing his troops. I didn't know who he was, but I felt the room shift, as if the air itself held its breath. Ronald adjusted his glasses, his face reddening. Sir, this is a private matter. We're handling a disruptive customer." The man raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. "Disruptive? I got a call about an elderly veteran being mistreated in this bank. I'd like to know why." Ethan stepped forward, shaking off Dwayne's grip. "Sir, they humiliated a woman named Margaret Thompson," he said, his voice steady but burning with conviction. "She's a Vietnam War nurse, tried to deposit her pension check, and the teller," he pointed at Kendra Davis, who was now frozen behind the counter, "mocked her, said she wasn't a real veteran, and had her escorted out." Kendra opened her mouth, but the man's stare silenced her. "Is this true?" he asked, turning to Ronald. Ronald stammered, his tie suddenly looking too tight. "There was an issue with her ID and check. We followed protocol." "Protocol!" The man cut in, his tone sharp but controlled. "Treating a veteran with disrespect is your protocol." I felt my heart pound as I stood there, Emily's hand squeezing my arm. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Susan Carter, the woman who'd seen my kindness to the teenage girl earlier, spoke up. "She was nothing but polite," Susan said, her voice trembling with anger. She gave a young girl money for coffee right before they treated her like garbage. The man turned to Kendra, his eyes narrowing. You're the teller who handled this? Kendra's confidence, so sharp earlier, was crumbling. I was just doing my job, she said, her voice small. Her ID was expired, and the check wouldn't scan. And you thought mocking her service was part of your job? The man asked, his words calm but heavy, like stones dropping into still water. The teenage boy with the phone piped up, waving it in the air. It's all on video, sir. I got the whole thing. It's blowing up online. The man nodded, a faint smile flickering across his face. Good. The truth always finds a way. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I stepped forward, my bad leg protesting, and cleared my throat. I'm Margaret Thompson, I said, my voice steady despite the weight of every eye on me. I just wanted to deposit my check. I didn't mean to cause all this. The man's expression softened, and he extended a hand. General Robert Callahan, he said, his grip firm and warm. Retired, U.S. Army. I was in the area when a friend called about what happened here. You served as a nurse in Vietnam, correct? Yes, sir, I said, meeting his gaze. Field hospital, 68 and 69. His eyes lit with respect, the kind I hadn't seen in years. Then we owe you a debt of gratitude, ma'am. I'm sorry you were treated so poorly today. I felt a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I wasn't used to being the center of anything, but standing there, with Ethan, Susan, and even that boy with his phone all watching, I felt seen. I just wanted to deposit my check, I said again, simpler this time. I didn't want trouble. You didn't cause trouble, Callahan said, turning to Ronald. This bank, however, has some explaining to do. Ronald's face was pale now, his hands fidgeting with his tie. Sir, I assure you, this was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Callahan interrupted, his voice rising just enough to make Ronald flinch. I've spoken to your regional director. He's on his way, but I wanted to see this for myself. He gestured to the two men behind him, their veterans' patches glinting under the lights. These gentlemen are with the Springfield Veterans Council. They take incidents like this very seriously. Kendra's smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure panic. Brittany, the younger teller who'd stayed quiet earlier, stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir, I tried to say something. I told Kendra we should try the check again, but Callahan nodded, his expression softening. You did the right thing, young lady. It takes courage to speak up. Ethan caught my eye, giving me a small nod, and I returned it, grateful for his fire. The teenage boy whispered to his phone, Yo, a general just showed up. This is next level. Callahan turned back to Ronald. Process Miss Thompson's check, now, and I expect a formal apology from your staff. Ronald swallowed hard, nodding like a scolded child. Of course, sir. Kendra, process the check. Kendra fumbled with the machine, her hands shaking so badly I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The check scanned this time, no beep of rejection, and she slid the deposit slip across the counter, her eyes fixed on the floor. It's done, she mumbled. Callahan raised an eyebrow. And the apology? Kendra's face flushed, but she met my gaze, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, ma'am. I shouldn't have said those things. I looked at her, my heart still heavy, but my resolve unbroken. Thank you, I said, my voice calm but firm. I hope you'll think twice before treating someone else that way. I meant it. Not out of spite, but because I'd seen too much pain in my life to wish it on others. Even her. The crowd erupted in applause, a sound that washed over me like a warm tide. Susan, Harold, even Brittany clapped, their faces lit with admiration. Ethan stepped closer, his smile genuine. You're a hero, ma'am, he said. Don't let anyone tell you different. I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years, not from the applause, but from the knowledge that I wasn't alone. Callahan stopped me as I turned to leave. Miss Thompson, he said, The Veterans Council would like to invite you to our next meeting. We could use someone with your strength." I hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that, General. Thank you." As I walked out, Emily at my side, the crowd parted, some offering quiet words of thanks. Outside, she hugged me tightly, her eyes shining. "I knew you'd get justice, Mrs. Thompson." I smiled, my heart lighter than it had been in decades. I didn't need the recognition, but knowing I'd stood my ground, and that others had stood with me, meant everything. Back inside, Ronald was on the phone, his voice low and nervous, likely facing a storm from his boss. Kendra sat at her counter, staring down, her confidence shattered. The boys' live stream ended with a final comment: "Respect your veterans, people. This is what happens when you don't." I boarded the bus, my wallet now holding the deposit slip and $50 for groceries. As Springfield rolled by, I looked out the window, the bank fading into the distance. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. And that was enough.